When I discovered what was hidden in the lining of that brown coat, I understood that I had spent 32 years of my life sleeping next to a murderer. Good afternoon, my dears. My name is Teresa Almeida Wilson. I'm 85 years old, born in 1940 in the small town of Millbrook, upstate New York. Today, I want to share with you a story that I've kept deep in my heart for many years. A story about trust, betrayal, and how even in our darkest hours, we can find the strength to begin again. Before I continue, I'd like to ask you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always a joy to know that my words reach so many different places. It was 1957. I was just 20 years old. The world was so different back then. We didn't have cell phones, internet, or all of today's conveniences. I worked as a clerk at the only bakery in town. I woke up at 4 a.m. every day to help prepare the bread before the first customers arrived. Life was simple, but it was honest. My first husband, Anthony, was a truck driver, a good, hard-working man who made deliveries throughout the state. We met at a Valentine's Day dance in 1955 and married just 6 months later. Love was like that back then, my dears. When you knew, you knew. We didn't drag things out like people do nowadays. Our daughter, Lucy, was born the following year. A beautiful little girl with her father's eyes and, as people said, my smile. Anthony adored her. He'd come back from his trips always with a little gift, even if it was just a colorful ribbon or a special candy. I remember as if it were yesterday, him singing her to sleep with that off-key voice that made me laugh so much. Our life wasn't rich, but it was happy. We had a simple 2-bedroom house with a small backyard where I planted basil, rosemary, and a cherry tree that Anthony brought back from a trip to Washington State. We planned to have more children, saved to buy a bigger piece of land, dreamed together. Then came that March morning in 1957. Anthony woke up complaining of stomach pains. It wasn't unusual. The food on the road wasn't always good, and he frequently suffered from digestive problems after his trips. I prepared some chamomile tea, as I always did, and he went to work anyway. He was too responsible to miss a day. That afternoon, I received the news that would change my life forever. Anthony had collapsed during a delivery. They took him to the small hospital in the neighboring town. When I arrived there, carrying Lucy in my arms, he was already unconscious. The doctor spoke of severe poisoning, but couldn't identify the cause. For 3 days, I stayed by that hospital bed, saying every prayer I knew, promising everything I could promise. On the 4th day, Anthony left this world without ever opening his eyes again. The doctors didn't have the resources for more complex tests back then. They mentioned multiple organ failure. They suggested the possibility of some spoiled food he might have eaten on the road, or even some rare tropical disease he could have contracted during his travels. The truth is that nobody knew for certain, and I accepted that uncertainty as just another cross to bear. Suddenly, I was a 20-year-old widow with an 8-month-old daughter to raise. I temporarily moved back in with my parents, but I knew I needed to regain my independence. I continued working at the bakery, now full-time. My mother looked after Lucy while I was away, and life went on one day at a time, as the old folks say. It was during this period of mourning and rebuilding that Nestor entered my life. He began to frequent the bakery every morning, always polite, always discreet. He was a few years older than me, perhaps around 30. He worked at Mr. Oliveira's pharmacy, across the town square. He had gentle brown eyes and a shy smile he rarely showed. At first, he was just another customer. He always ordered the same thing, 2 French rolls and a caramel for work. Over time, he began to exchange a few words with me. He'd ask about the weather, comment on the radio news, nothing too personal. After a few weeks, he asked about the widow's ring I wore. That was the first time we talked about Anthony. Nestor knew how to listen, as few people do. As I talked about my husband, about the emptiness his departure had left, he just listened with those attentive, compassionate eyes. He never interrupted me, never tried to diminish my pain with cliches. He just listened. One day he brought a small teddy bear for Lucy. "I saw it in the store window and thought of your little girl," he said without pretense. That simple gesture touched me deeply. It was the first time since Anthony's death that someone had thought not just of me, but also of my daughter. Our relationship developed slowly, respectfully. Nestor knew that my heart was still in the process of healing. He never pushed anything, never demanded more than I could give. We began to meet on Sundays after church. He would bring a book, I would bring some embroidery, and we would sit on the park bench, each engaged in our own activities, simply enjoying each other's company while Lucy played nearby. 6 months after meeting him, Nestor asked me to be his girlfriend. It was a simple request, without grand gestures, as was typical of his discreet personality. I accepted, not out of overwhelming passion. I had already experienced that with Anthony and knew that certain loves only happen once in a lifetime. But I accepted because of a feeling of security, of companionship that was beginning to blossom. My family was divided. My father thought it was too soon, that I was still vulnerable from my loss. My mother, more pragmatic, saw in Nestor a chance for stability for me and Lucy. "A woman alone with a child doesn't have an easy life in this world," she would say. And deep down, I knew she was right. We dated for 4 months before Nestor asked for my hand in marriage. I remember wondering if I was betraying Anthony's memory. But when I looked at Lucy, who was almost 2 years old and needed a father figure, I thought that perhaps Anthony would understand. Perhaps he would even approve. He always said he wanted to see us happy above all else. We married in a simple ceremony in January 1958, just family and a few close friends. Nestor had rented a small house, more comfortable, near the pharmacy where he worked. Lucy had her own little room decorated with floral wallpaper that he had put up himself. We began a new life together. From the beginning, I noticed that Nestor had some peculiarities. He was extremely organized, almost obsessive about the cleanliness and order of the house. He had fixed times for everything: waking up, having breakfast, going to work, coming home. Any change to this routine would make him visibly anxious. But of all his quirks, the most striking, the one that would become a central element in our married life, was his relationship with that brown coat. It was a simple coat, made of thick wool with wooden buttons and patched elbows. There was nothing special about its appearance, but for Nestor, it was an invaluable treasure. "This coat belonged to my father," he explained shortly after we married. "It's the only memento I have of him. I promised I would keep it forever." The coat always hung on a special hanger in the corner of our wardrobe. Nestor only wore it on very specific occasions, on his father's birthday, on dates that had some special meaning for him. On the coldest days, he would rather be cold than wear that coat. During our first winter together, I offered to wash the coat, which already had a peculiar musty smell. Nestor's reaction frightened me. His normally calm face transformed. His eyes widened in panic. "Never, ever touch this coat," he said with a firmness he had never shown before. "It still has my father's scent. If it's washed, I'll lose the last connection I have with him." I apologized, confused by the intensity of his reaction. He calmed down quickly, returning to being the gentle, controlled Nestor I knew. But that moment remained etched in my memory. It was the first time I saw a side of him I didn't know. Over time, that rule became an unspoken understanding in our house. I cleaned, washed, and organized all the clothes, all the objects, except for the brown coat. That piece of fabric was sacred, untouchable. I respected this without questioning, as we respect the idiosyncrasies of those we love. The years passed. Lucy grew up calling Nestor Dad. Her real father existed only in the stories I told and in the few photographs we kept. We had another child, Michael, in 1960. Our life was peaceful, organized, predictable. Nestor was a good provider, a present father in his reserved way, a respectful husband. I can't say we lived a great passionate love. What we had was a partnership, a comfortable companionship. He never disrespected me, never raised his voice, never let anything be lacking in our home. In return, I kept our home in order, raised our children, respected his peculiarities, especially and particularly his precious brown coat. For 32 years, that coat remained in the same place, guarding a secret that I could never have imagined. A secret that, when finally revealed, would prove that sometimes the most terrible monsters hide not under the bed, but beside it, breathing calmly as we sleep. 32 years passed since I married Nestor. 32 years of an apparently normal life, with ups and downs like any marriage. Lucy was already married, living in New York City with her husband and my 2 beautiful grandchildren. Michael had graduated in engineering and was working for a large company in Boston. Nestor and I, now entering our senior years, lived alone in that same house, which over time had been renovated and expanded. It was 1989. America was experiencing changing times. It was the first year with a new president after the Reagan era. I remember that Sunday, July 23rd, the sky dawned heavy with dark clouds. Nestor, as he always did on Sundays, left right after breakfast to play dominoes with friends in the park. It was the only time he allowed himself to break his rigid routine. "I'll be back before lunch, Teresa," he said, as he always did. He kissed me on the forehead and left, carefully closing the door behind him. I stayed alone, tending to the plants in the backyard, listening to my small radio. It was a humid, muggy heat, the kind that announces a storm. Around 10 o'clock, the sky opened up. A heavy rain with thunderclaps that made the house shake. I ran inside, closing the windows. That's when I heard that strange noise coming from our bedroom, a sound of water dripping. My heart immediately quickened. Problems with the roof meant expenses, and Nestor hated financial surprises. I entered the bedroom and was horrified to see a dark stain spreading across the ceiling right above our wardrobe. Thick drops were falling directly onto the old wood. Without thinking twice, I rushed to save our clothes before they were ruined. I opened the doors of the furniture and began to remove everything. The folded sheets from the top shelf, the dresses hanging on hangers, the shirts organized by color as Nestor liked them. I worked quickly, worried about the damage the water could cause. That's when I reached that specific corner of the wardrobe. The corner where for more than 3 decades the untouchable brown coat had hung. I paused, hesitant. In 32 years of marriage, I had never disobeyed that one rule. I had never touched that coat. But water was now running down the wall, staining the fabric. If I didn't remove it from there, it would be ruined forever, and that, I knew, would be unbearable for Nestor. "Forgive me," I murmured, as if speaking to the coat itself, and extended my hand. The sensation of touching that fabric for the first time was strange, almost forbidden. The wool was rough, worn by time, and I realized it was heavier than it looked. I carefully removed it from the hanger and took it to our bed, away from the water that continued to drip. I could have simply left it there, stretched out, waiting for it to dry naturally. That's what I should have done. But something, curiosity perhaps, or a sixth sense that warns us when we're about to discover an important truth, made me examine the coat more closely. I ran my hand over the wool, feeling its texture. That's when I noticed something strange in the lining. A part seemed more voluminous, as if there was something hidden between the outer fabric and the lining. My fingers found a small tear in the inner seam, almost imperceptible. My heart was racing as I debated with myself. Should I continue? I was invading my husband's privacy. That coat was sacred to him. But at the same time, we had been married for so long. What secret could be so important as to be hidden for decades? The rain continued outside, the noise muffling the sound of my increasingly rapid breathing. Carefully, I inserted 2 fingers into that small opening and felt something. Paper. There was something paper hidden in the coat lining. Delicately, I pulled out what was hidden there. It was an envelope yellowed by time, with no address or identification. It wasn't sealed. I opened it with trembling hands and found 2 folded sheets of paper. Nestor's unmistakable handwriting filled my eyes. My God! I whispered to the empty room as I began to read. March 15th, 1957, the letter began. Today I finalized what I started 3 weeks ago. The last dose was administered yesterday. The doctors won't be able to identify it. The arsenic in small, gradually increased doses simulates a natural illness. When they discover it, if they discover it, it will be too late. She will be free. She deserves someone better than him. My hands were shaking so much, I almost dropped the paper. March 15th, 1957. Exactly the date when Anthony began to feel ill. Exactly the day that marked the beginning of his death. I continued reading each word like a stab in my chest. I've been observing her for months at the bakery. Her smile, her kindness to everyone, the way she cares for her small daughter. She deserves more than an always absent husband, always on the road. He doesn't value her as he should. She needs someone who is present, who protects her, who loves her as she deserves to be loved. I felt my stomach turn. It couldn't be what I was thinking. It was impossible. There had to be another explanation. But the letter continued relentlessly. I started with minimal quantities in the coffee he always drank when he stopped at the pharmacy before his trips. He never suspected. No one suspected. I gradually increased the dose each time he appeared. Today, the final dose. In a few days, she will be free, and then I will patiently enter her life. I will be her support, her shoulder to cry on. One day, perhaps she can love me as I have loved her from the first moment I saw her. The paper slipped from my fingers and fell onto the bedspread. Hot tears were running down my face, but I barely felt them. A strange buzzing filled my ears, as if the whole world had been silenced, leaving only the sound of my heart breaking. Nestor, my husband of 3 decades, the man who had raised my daughter as his own, the man who slept beside me every night. He had killed Anthony, killed him deliberately, coldly, methodically, to have me. I picked up the second sheet, barely able to see through the tears. It was a continuation written in the same handwriting, but dated January 10th, 1958, the eve of our wedding. Tomorrow she will be my wife. I succeeded. She suspects nothing. No one suspects. The plan worked perfectly. Sometimes when I see her playing with his daughter, I feel a pang of guilt. But then I remember how she smiles more now, how she seems lighter, happier by my side. I did what was necessary. I freed her from a mediocre marriage. I will give her and the girl a better life, a life they deserve. I keep this confession with me because I need this reminder of what I am capable of doing for love, of the power I have. I will carry this secret like an amulet close to my heart forever. If one day it is discovered, so be it. I will have lived each day knowing that I conquered in my own way what I desired most in the world. The last words of the letter hit me like a punch. 32 years. For 32 years, I had lived, loved, shared my bed and my life with the murderer of my first husband. A man who had coldly calculated each step, who had slowly poisoned the father of my child, who had taken advantage of my vulnerability as a recent widow. And the coat, the sacred, untouchable coat, wasn't a memento of his father. It was the perfect hiding place for his confession. He carried it with him like a macabre trophy, a constant reminder of his perfect crime. I looked at the clock on the wall. Almost noon. Nestor would return soon from his dominoes game. What would I do? How would I look at him knowing what I now knew? How would I pretend that nothing had changed? The storm outside seemed to reflect the storm inside me. Thunder echoed as I tried to breathe, tried to think clearly. My entire life, all my memories were being rewritten in light of this terrible truth. I remembered Anthony in his last days, wasting away in that hospital bed, not understanding what was happening to his body. I remembered Nestor, appearing at the bakery day after Anthony's death, offering his friendly shoulder, his comforting company. All planned, all a lie. The photos of our family on the wall now seemed to mock me. Our 25th anniversary celebration, Michael's birth, Birthdays, Christmases, all moments built upon a foundation of blood and lies. I put the letters back in the envelope with trembling hands. I couldn't let Nestor know that I had discovered them. No, I still needed time to think, to plan my next step. Carefully, I placed the envelope exactly where I had found it, in the tear in the lining. I hung the coat back in the wardrobe, now in another corner, away from the leak. Then I ran to the bathroom and vomited everything in my stomach. I washed my face with cold water, trying to erase the signs of crying. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back at me. In a matter of minutes, I had aged years. I heard the sound of the front door opening. Nestor had returned. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and did the most difficult thing I had ever done in my life. I put on a mask of normalcy. "Did the rain catch you on the way?" I asked, leaving the bathroom with a forced smile. Nestor was shaking his umbrella on the porch. I managed to reach Jack's store before it got worse. I stayed there until it let up a bit. He came in, leaving his wet shoes at the door, as he always did. The game was good today. I won 5 matches. How could he seem so normal? How could he talk about trivial things like dominoes games while carrying such a monstrous secret? How could he look into my eyes day after day, year after year, knowing what he had done? "We have a leak in the bedroom," I managed to say, keeping my voice steady, "right above the wardrobe." I saw his body subtly stiffen. "The wardrobe? Were any clothes damaged?" "I managed to remove everything in time," I replied, carefully observing his reaction. "Everything is fine." His eyes studied me for a moment, looking for any sign that I had discovered his secret. I must have played my part well, because he visibly relaxed. "I'll take a look at the roof as soon as the rain stops," he said, hanging his wet coat on the coat rack at the entrance. So methodical, so organized. A place for everything, everything in its place, including his terrible secret. That was the most difficult meal of my life. Sitting at the table with the man I thought I knew, the man who now revealed himself to be a monster. Each forkful was an effort, each smile a lie, each word of banal conversation, a torture. "You're quiet today," he commented as we washed the dishes together, as we had done for decades. "Just worried about the leak," I lied. "I hope it won't cost much to fix." He nodded, accepting my explanation without question. How easy it was to lie to him, I realized, perhaps because he himself was a walking lie. That night, lying beside him in our double bed, I stared at the ceiling for hours, listening to his calm breathing. How could he sleep so peacefully? How could he live with himself after what he had done? And more importantly, what would I do now? I spent that entire night awake, watching the man who slept beside me. How could he breathe so calmly? How could he rest with such peace while I was shattered inside? Nestor, the man I had called husband for 3 decades, now seemed like a complete stranger to me. The next morning, Monday, I got up before him, as I always did. I prepared coffee, fried the eggs exactly as he liked them, lightly golden at the edges, but with the yolk still soft. I set the table, served the orange juice in his usual glass. Each movement, each gesture was automatic, the result of years of routine. But now each action seemed like a betrayal to Anthony, to myself, to the truth. "Good morning, dear," said Nestor, entering the kitchen with the newspaper under his arm. He was wearing his navy blue robe, a gift I had given him on our 20th anniversary. "The rain has finally stopped." "Good morning," I replied, avoiding his eyes. How could I look at him without my face revealing everything I knew? "I've been thinking about the leak," he continued, sitting at the table. "I'll call Pereira today. He's always done good work for us." I nodded silently, serving him coffee. As I watched the dark liquid fill the cup, I couldn't help but think, was this how he poisoned Anthony? An imperceptible dose with each morning coffee? My hand trembled slightly, spilling a few drops on the white tablecloth. "Is everything all right, Teresa?" he asked, noticing my nervousness. "Yes, I just didn't sleep well, worried about the damage the water might have caused." He nodded, seeming to accept my explanation. But for a brief moment, I saw something in his eyes. A shadow of doubt, perhaps. Or was it just my now hyper-vigilant imagination, looking for signs of danger where there were none? That day, and in the days that followed, I lived in a constant state of alert. Every movement of Nestor's, every word, every look was analyzed. Would he suspect that I knew? Would he notice the change in my behavior? My mind worked non-stop, considering all possibilities. Should I confront him? Report him to the police? But what proof did I have besides a confession written decades ago, hidden in a coat? Would it be enough to convict him after so much time? And if he denied everything, destroyed the evidence? And there was more. A terrible thought occurred to me on the third night of insomnia. If Nestor was capable of coldly, meticulously killing Anthony just to have me, what else might he be capable of if I confronted him? If I threatened to expose him, would my life be in danger? By Thursday of that same week, I couldn't stand being alone with my terrifying thoughts anymore. I needed air, distance, a break from that man whose mere presence now gave me chills. I invented an excuse. I needed to visit an old friend who was sick in another city. I'm going to stay at Carol's house for a few days, I told Nestor during dinner. She's recovering from surgery and needs help. Nestor frowned slightly. It wasn't common for me to spend nights away from home. Can't you visit her during the day and come back to sleep at home? It's too far, I replied, keeping my voice firm, and she needs someone during the night too. You can manage on your own for a few days, can't you? He was silent for a moment, studying my face. Then he nodded slowly. Of course. How long do you plan to stay? I'm not sure. Maybe a week. Another silence. I could almost hear the gears turning in his mind, evaluating, calculating. All right, but call me every day. I'll be worried. I agreed, relieved that he hadn't questioned more. The next morning, I packed a small suitcase and left, but I didn't go to Carol's house. I went to the bus station and bought a ticket to New York City. I needed to see Lucy, my daughter. I needed someone I could trust. The 4-hour bus journey was a whirlwind of emotions. I cried silently, looking out the window at the landscapes that passed in green and brown blurs. What would I tell Lucy? How would I explain that the man she had called Dad, since she could remember, was, in fact, the murderer of her biological father? I arrived at her apartment in the early afternoon. When she opened the door and saw me there, with swollen eyes and a small suitcase in hand, her face immediately transformed into concern. Mom, what happened? Where's Dad? Dad? How bitter that word now sounded in my ears. We need to talk, honey, was all I could say before the tears came again. We sat in her kitchen while the children were at school. With a cup of tea in my hands to give me some comfort, I told her everything. The leak, the coat, the letters, the terrible truth I had discovered. Lucy listened in shock, her eyes widening, her hand covering her mouth in horror. Are you sure, Mom? Absolutely sure? I read it with my own eyes, honey. His confession written by himself. There's no other way to interpret it. She stood up, walked around the small kitchen, ran her hands through her hair, a gesture she had inherited from me, a gesture she made when she was deeply disturbed. This is monstrous, simply monstrous. He killed my father, my biological father, and then pretended to be my father for my entire life. I felt unable to find words to ease her pain. There was no way to soften that truth. And you think he might be dangerous to you now? That he might do something if he discovered that you know? It was the question that had been tormenting me for days. I don't know. For 32 years he was a normal husband, never violent, never threatening. But now I don't know who he is anymore. I don't know what he's capable of. Lucy sat down again, took my hands in hers. You can't go back to that house, Mom. You can't stay alone with him. But if I don't go back, he'll know something is wrong. He'll come looking for me, asking questions. Let him. You stay here with us. Rick and I will figure it out. The kids will love having Grandma living with them. The offer was tempting. The idea of not having to face Nestor again, of not having to live under the same roof as him, was an immense relief. But something inside me knew it wouldn't be that simple. And what do we do about the crime? Do we report it? Lucy bit her lip thoughtfully. I'm going to call a friend of ours who's a lawyer. We need to know if it's still possible to prosecute him after so much time. What evidence would be necessary? I spent 3 days in Lucy's apartment, hiding like a fugitive. Her lawyer friend came to visit us and gave us discouraging news. After so much time, it would be extremely difficult to prove the crime. The written confession, without other forensic evidence to support it, could be questioned. Nestor could claim it was fiction, a story he had written, or that he was mentally disturbed at the time. Additionally, the lawyer explained, there's the issue of the statute of limitations. Depending on how it's legally classified, the crime may have already expired. On the 3rd day, the phone rang. It was Nestor looking for me at Carol's house. My confused friend said she hadn't seen me in months. Panic settled in my chest. He knew I had lied. He knew something was wrong. An hour later, Lucy's apartment phone rang. It was him. "Where are you, Teresa?" he asked, his voice strangely calm. "I went to Carol's house. She says she hasn't seen you since her birthday in March." My heart was beating so hard I thought he might hear it through the phone. "I'm at Lucy's house," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why did you lie to me? Why didn't you simply say you were going to visit our daughter?" Our daughter. How false those words sounded now. "I needed some time to think, Nestor." A heavy silence on the other end of the line. "Think about what exactly?" That's when I realized. He knew. Somehow he knew I had discovered his secret. Perhaps he had checked the coat, noticed it was in a different place, realized that the envelope had been disturbed. "About us," I replied vaguely. "About our life together." Another, even longer silence. "You looked at the coat, didn't you? During the leak." I felt a chill run down my spine. There was no more denying it. "Yes," I finally admitted, "and I found the letters. Nestor, I know what you did." I heard his breathing change on the other end of the line, faster, heavier. "We need to talk, Teresa. It's not what you're thinking. I can explain everything." "Explain what? How you methodically poisoned the father of my child? How you planned everything? How you took advantage of my grief? How you built our entire life on a monstrous lie?" My voice was rising as decades of repressed anger emerged all at once. Lucy placed her hand on my shoulder, a silent gesture for me to calm down. "It wasn't like that," he said, his voice now almost pleading. "Please, come home. We'll talk in person. I have so much to tell you, to explain." "I will never set foot in that house again," I replied, feeling a strength I didn't know I possessed. "I never want to look at your face again. You destroyed my life, Nestor. You destroyed my daughter's family." "No," he almost shouted. "I gave you both a life. I gave everything of myself to you and Lucy. I did everything out of love, Teresa. Everything out of love for you." "This isn't love," I replied, tears flowing freely down my face. "It's obsession. It's sickness. It's pure evil." "I'm coming there," he said, his voice now cold and determined. "We'll resolve this in person." The fear returned with full force. "Don't come. I don't want to see you. It's my daughter's house." "I have every right to go there." "She's not your daughter," I shouted, completely losing control. "You killed her father. You're just the monster who took advantage of a widow and a child." There was a crash on the other end of the line, as if something had been thrown against the wall. Then silence, and then a voice I barely recognized as Nestor's, low, controlled, but filled with an icy anger. "I'll be there tomorrow. We'll talk." Then the line went dead. I looked at Lucy, terror stamped on my face. "He's coming here," I whispered, "and I think he's furious." That night was the longest of my life. Lucy called Rick, her husband, at work, and explained the situation in a few words. He returned home immediately, his face grave and concerned. Together we discussed what to do. Call the police? But what would we say? That we suspected my husband had committed a murder more than 30 years ago based on a letter I had found hidden? It would sound absurd. It might even put us in the position of suspects for a false accusation. You can't stay here, Rick decided. If he's coming here and he's furious, it's not safe. But where would we go? Asked Lucy, hugging the children who had just returned from school, confused by all the commotion. To my brother's house on the coast, replied Rick. He's traveling for work. The house is empty. I have the keys. You can stay there until we resolve this situation. That's how at 10 o'clock at night we found ourselves in Rick's car, driving in silence toward Cape Cod. The children, Peter, 8, and Mary, 6, fell asleep in the back seat, oblivious to the drama unfolding. Lucy looked out the window, lost in thought. I tried to process how my life had been turned upside down in just 1 week. We arrived at Lucy's brother-in-law's house around midnight. A simple but comfortable house, a few blocks from the beach. Rick helped us get settled, promised to return the next day after work, and departed back to New York. The plan was for him to meet Nestor, talk to him, try to calm him down, and understand his intentions. That dawn, lying in the guest bed, listening to the distant sound of the sea, I made a decision. I couldn't continue running. I couldn't allow my daughter and my grandchildren to have their lives disrupted because of my past. The next morning, after Lucy took the children to see the beach, I took the phone and called our house. Nestor answered on the first ring, as if he had been sitting next to the device, waiting. "Where are you?" he asked immediately, his voice hoarse, as if he hadn't slept. "That doesn't matter," I replied. "I won't tell you where I am, but I want to talk in person." There was a moment of silence, as if he was surprised by my initiative. "Come home then. We can talk here." "No," I replied firmly. "I will never return to that house again." "Teresa, please." "No, Nestor." "Meet me in a public place, at the Grand Central Mall, in the food court, at 3 in the afternoon. If you don't show up, I'm going straight to the police with what I discovered." I don't know where I got the courage to make that threat. Maybe from desperation. Maybe from the anger accumulated for days. Maybe from the maternal instinct to protect my family. "I'll be there," he replied after a long pause. "But come alone. This is between the two of us." "Yes," I agreed. "Between the two of us." I hung up the phone, my heart beating so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. When Lucy returned with the children, I told her my plan. She was horrified. "Mom, you can't meet him alone. It's too dangerous." "It's a public place, honey, with hundreds of people around. He wouldn't do anything there. You don't know what he's capable of. The man killed my biological father in cold blood. That's precisely why I need to face him. I need to hear it from his mouth. I need to understand how I could live so long beside someone like that without ever noticing." After hours of discussion, we reached an agreement. I would meet Nestor, but Rick would be nearby, discreetly observing everything, ready to intervene at the slightest sign of danger. At 2:30 that afternoon, Rick dropped me off at the mall entrance. My legs were trembling as I walked through the corridors toward the food court. Each step seemed heavy as lead. I chose a table in the center of the area, where we would be completely visible to everyone around. I ordered a coffee that I couldn't drink, just to have something to do with my restless hands. At 3 o'clock sharp, I saw Nestor entering the food court. Even from a distance, I noticed how haggard he looked. Deep shadows marked his face. His unshaven beard gave him a disheveled appearance I had never seen before. He spotted me immediately and walked in my direction with slow, almost reluctant steps. "Teresa," he said, stopping in front of the table without sitting. "Sit down," I ordered, indicating the chair in front of me. He obeyed, his eyes never leaving mine. For a long moment, we just stared at each other in silence. 32 years of marriage. And it was as if we were seeing each other for the first time. "Why?" I finally asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Why did you do that?" Nestor looked at his hands resting on the table. Hands that I knew so well, hands that had caressed my face, held our son when he was born, fixed things in our house, hands that had administered poison to Anthony. "I loved you," he replied simply, as if that explained everything. "From the first moment I saw you at the bakery, smiling at customers, always kind, always radiant. It was as if everyone around you was in shadow, and you were the only person truly alive." I felt nauseated hearing those words. Love, how could he call something so sick love? And that gave you the right to kill the man I had chosen to share my life with, the father of my child? "He didn't deserve you," replied Nestor, his voice hardening. "Always on the road, rarely at home. I saw how you stayed alone, taking care of the girl, working, waiting for him. I saw how your eyes lost a little of their sparkle each time he left again." "That wasn't your problem," I exclaimed, controlling the volume of my voice to not draw too much attention. "It was my marriage, my choice. You had no right to decide for me." "I gave you a better life," he insisted, leaning forward. "I gave you and Lucy stability, security, a home. I was a good husband, a good father. In those 32 years, did I ever fail to respect you? Did I ever not care for you both as if you were the most precious thing in the world?" I felt hot tears running down my face. How could he be so blind, so incapable of seeing the horror of what he had done? "You built our life on a monstrous lie," I replied, each word weighing like stone. "Every moment of supposed happiness we lived was stolen from Anthony. Every smile of Lucy's that you witnessed should have been his. You stole not just his life, but all the moments he should have lived." Nestor ran his hand through his graying hair, a gesture of frustration I knew well. "You would never understand. What I did out of love." "This isn't love," I replied, staring at him firmly. "It's obsession, it's sickness. And I lived all these years beside this sickness without knowing." "And now?" he asked, a tone of challenge in his voice. "Are you going to the police after so much time? Who would believe you?" "I have your confession. An old letter that you say you found. I can deny I wrote it, can say it's an attempt on your part to get rid of me now that we're old. Without a body to exhume, without physical evidence, it would be your word against mine." I then realized the extent of the cold calculation that had always existed behind those brown eyes that I thought I knew. Even now confronted, he was still thinking about how to escape, how to manipulate the situation in his favor. "It doesn't matter whether or not I can put you in jail, Nestor. What matters is that now I know who you really are, and I will never again allow you to be part of my life or the life of my family." I saw something change in his eyes, a flicker of fear, perhaps the realization that this time he wouldn't be able to manipulate me. "Teresa, please," his voice suddenly pleading. 32 years together. You can't simply throw everything away because of something that happened so long ago, something that can't be changed now. You destroyed my life the moment you decided to kill Anthony. I just didn't realize it until now." At that moment, I felt a strange calm envelop me. It was as if a huge weight was being lifted from my shoulders. The weight of living a lie, of sharing my life with someone who was never who I thought he was. "I want a divorce," I said firmly. "I won't return to that house. You can keep everything. I don't want anything that was bought with the price of Anthony's life." Nestor turned pale. "You can't be serious. Where will you live? What will you live on? You're 52 years old, Teresa." "I would rather live in a cardboard box on the street than spend another day under the same roof as you." His hands closed into fists on the table. For a brief moment, I saw a raw fury in his gaze that made me instinctively recoil. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the fury dissipated, replaced by an expression I had never seen on his face. Defeat. "I thought you would never find out," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "All these years I kept that letter with me as a reminder of what I did for love, of what I sacrificed. I thought that if you ever discovered it, you would understand how much I loved you. I perfectly understand what you feel for me, Nestor, and it's not love. It never was. We sat in silence for a few moments, the buzz of the food court around us seeming surreal given the intensity of that moment. I need you to promise me one thing, I finally said. I need you to promise that you will stay away from me and my family, away from Lucy, away from Michael, away from my grandchildren. If you try to approach any of us, I will go directly to the police with your confession. Nestor stared at me for a long moment, his eyes scanning my face as if looking for some sign of doubt, some crack through which he could infiltrate again. He found nothing but determination. You have my word, he finally replied, his voice low and defeated. I'll do what you ask. I stood up, ready to leave him and that life of lies behind. But before leaving, there was one last question that tormented me. Why did you keep the confession all these years? Why risk me discovering it? A sad smile formed on his lips. Because I needed the reminder that I was capable of doing anything for you, that I had that power. It was like a trophy that only I could see. And perhaps, deep down, I wanted you to know someday. I wanted you to understand the extent of my love. Those words caused a chill that ran down my entire spine. I turned without responding and walked away, feeling his eyes on my back with each step. I didn't look back. Rick was waiting for me at the mall exit, his face tense with concern. When he saw me, he ran in my direction. Is everything all right? He didn't try anything? It's over, I replied, feeling a profound exhaustion settle in my body. It's all over. But I knew as I got into the car and we left the mall behind that it hadn't really ended, that the echoes of that revelation would continue to reverberate in my life and in the lives of my children for a long time, that nothing would be the same again. And yet, for the first time in a week, I breathed deeply, feeling a weight being lifted from my shoulders. The truth, however painful it might be, had finally been confronted, and with it began my true liberation. The months that followed that confrontation at the mall were the most difficult and, paradoxically, the most liberating of my life. I stayed living with Lucy and her family for a few weeks until we could officially organize the separation. Rick, my son-in-law, recommended a lawyer specializing in family law who helped me with the divorce proceedings. I want it to be quick and clean, I explained to her in our first meeting. I don't want anything material, just my freedom. The lawyer, a middle-aged woman with perceptive eyes, studied me over her reading glasses. Mrs. Wilson, I understand your emotional situation, but you need to think about your future. You were married for more than 3 decades. You're entitled to half of everything. I shook my head firmly. I don't want anything that comes from him. Absolutely nothing. After much insistence, I agreed to receive only a monthly alimony that would allow me to live modestly, without depending entirely on my children. Even that caused me discomfort, but it was the most practical solution at the moment. Nestor, surprisingly, created no obstacles, accepted all terms without arguing, signed all necessary papers. Perhaps he knew he was in a vulnerable position due to what I had discovered. Perhaps it was just another form of manipulation. Appearing reasonable, understanding, in the hope that I would eventually change my mind. The divorce was finalized in record time. There were no contentious hearings, no disputes over assets, just the official end of something that, in my heart, had already ended the moment I read those letters. During this period, I had to tell the truth to Michael, my son with Nestor. It was the most difficult conversation of my life. How do you explain to a 29-year-old man that the father he had always loved and admired had committed such a monstrous crime? How do you ask him to process information that I myself was still struggling to understand? Michael reacted with disbelief, then anger, then a profound sadness. He spent weeks without speaking to any of us, processing everything in his own way. Eventually he returned, his eyes marked by sleepless nights, his face thinner, older. I don't know how to deal with this, Mom, he confessed, sitting in my newly rented small apartment, a cup of coffee cooling between his hands. Part of me wants to hate him forever. Another part remembers all the times he was a good father to me. I know exactly how you feel, I replied, holding his hand. It's possible that he was, in his way, a good father. That doesn't erase what he did, but it also doesn't erase the good moments you shared. Over time, Michael established a distant but cordial relationship with Nestor. They would meet occasionally for coffee. They would talk about superficial matters, carefully avoiding the elephant in the room. It was the most he could offer, and Nestor wisely accepted without demanding more. Lucy, on the other hand, cut all ties. For her, there was no possible forgiveness for the man who had stolen her real father. She forbade Nestor from approaching her children, and he respected that decision, as he had promised in our meeting at the mall. As for me, I began to rebuild my life from scratch at 52. I rented a small apartment in Queens, not too far from Lucy's house, but far enough for my independence. I went back to work, getting a job as an administrative assistant in a medical clinic. The salary wasn't much, but added to the alimony, it allowed me to live with dignity. The nights were the most difficult time. Alone in that silent apartment, without the presence of another person, after decades of sharing a space, I would find myself staring at the ceiling, mentally reviewing my entire life, looking for signs I should have noticed, clues I should have followed. There were moments when anger consumed me, anger at Nestor for his monstrous betrayal, but also anger at myself for having been so blind, so naive. How did I not realize something was wrong? How could I live so many years beside a murderer without ever suspecting? I began to see a therapist, Dr. Helen, recommended by the lawyer who handled my divorce. Our weekly sessions became an anchor, a safe space where I could express all the contradictory feelings that assailed me. It's normal to feel this way, she assured me. You're going through a grieving process, not just for the loss of your marriage, but for the loss of the idea you had of it, of the life you believed you had lived. With her help, I began to understand that I couldn't blame myself for not noticing. Nestor was a skilled manipulator who had meticulously planned every aspect of his farce, and more importantly, I began to understand that even though I had lived a lie, not everything in my life had been false. Your children are real, Doctor. Helen reminded me in a particularly difficult session. The love you feel for them, their love for you, that is genuine. The friendships you built, the experiences you lived, all of that is yours, Teresa. No one can take that away from you. I clung to these words on the most difficult days, when the weight of the truth seemed unbearable. 6 months after the divorce, I received an unexpected phone call. It was Carla, an old neighbor from Millbrook, the town where Anthony and I had lived, where it all began. Teresa, is that really you? My God, how long has it been? We talked for almost an hour, catching up. Carla still lived in the same house, still knew everyone in the small town. She casually mentioned that the old hospital where Anthony had died was being demolished to make way for a new medical center. They're finding interesting things in the old archives, she commented. Medical records from decades ago, documents no one remembered existed. Something lit up inside me. An idea, a possibility. Carla, I asked, trying to keep my voice casual, do you know if the medical records from when Anthony was hospitalized still exist? Probably yes. They're organizing everything before the demolition. Why? I made up some excuse, curiosity, nostalgia, but as soon as I hung up the phone, I contacted Michael. He was an engineer, knew people, had contacts. If anyone could help me access those archives, it would be him. 2 weeks later, I was back in Millbrook for the first time in decades. The town had changed, grown in some areas, maintained its provincial charm in others. The hospital, now partially demolished, was a mixture of rubble and structures still standing. Thanks to Michael's contacts, I got authorization to visit the temporary archive where the old documents were being cataloged before being transferred to the new hospital. A young employee, who must not have been born when I lived there, guided me through dusty shelves. We're organizing by decade, she explained. The records from 1950 to 1960 are in that section. With trembling hands, I began to search. Anthony Wilson, March 1957. It seemed an impossible search amid so many folders yellowed by time, so many names, so many stories. And then, like a miracle, I found a thin folder, his name written in faded cursive. Inside, a few pages, medical notes, results of basic tests, the death certificate. Acute intoxication of undetermined origin, said the final diagnosis. Multiple organ failure. But there was something else. A small envelope attached to the last page with the inscription, Pending Central Laboratory, New York City. I opened it carefully. It was a toxicological test result sent to a better-equipped laboratory in the city after Anthony's death. The result had arrived too late to change the diagnosis or the death certificate and ended up filed and forgotten. Significant presence of arsenical compounds, said the report in technical language, consistent with chronic arsenic poisoning. I felt my legs weaken. There it was in black and white, proof of Nestor's crime. The test had been done, the poison detected, but as was common at that time in small towns, without resources or knowledge for deeper investigations, the case was closed as a natural death. With the authorization of the hospital administration and after explaining part of the situation, omitting the accusations against Nestor, I obtained a certified copy of the complete medical record, including the result of the toxicological test. I didn't know exactly what I would do with that information, but I felt I needed to have it with me. Back in New York, I showed the documents to Lucy and Michael. Both were silent for long minutes after reading. "Does this change anything for you, Mom?" Lucy finally asked. I reflected on the question. It did change things. I already knew what Nestor had done. I had already made my decision to leave him, to rebuild my life. "It doesn't change what happened," I replied slowly. "But it confirms that I'm not crazy, that I didn't imagine all this. It's a validation, I suppose." "And what about reporting him?" asked Michael, his voice tense. "With this, maybe the police would take it seriously." I thought long and hard about that possibility. Taking Nestor to justice for a crime committed more than 3 decades ago, facing a judicial process, exposing our family, publicly stirring up all that horror. "I don't know if I have the strength for that," I admitted, "or if that's what I really want." I kept the documents in a bank safe, an insurance against any future eventuality. If Nestor ever broke his promise, if he tried to approach or threaten any of us, I would have that concrete proof to use. But for now, I preferred to focus on reconstruction, on each small step, each small victory. I learned to cook for just one person, to sleep alone without fear, to find pleasure in activities I had never experienced before. I went back to studying. First, a technical course in administration to improve my skills at work. Then, for pure pleasure, watercolor painting classes on Saturdays at the Cultural Center. I discovered I had a talent for colors, for capturing landscapes and faces. Each brushstroke was a form of therapy, each completed painting a small victory over the past. As the years passed, the wound slowly healed. It never completely disappeared. Some wounds are too deep for that, but I learned to live with it, to integrate it into my story. Michael married in 1993 to a charming young woman named Renata. They invited Nestor to the ceremony, but he attended only the church service, keeping himself discreetly away during the reception. Our gazes crossed briefly across the hall. He was older, more stooped. I was stronger, more sure of myself. We didn't exchange words. Lucy had her 3rd child that same year, a girl who received my name. I dedicated myself to being the best grandmother possible, perhaps compensating for the lost time, the concealed truths, the lived lies. In 1995, at 58, I met Robert during an outing organized by the Senior Cultural Center. He had been a widower for 10 years, a retired history professor, with kind eyes and a contagious laugh. We started as friends, sharing coffees after painting classes, exchanging books, talking about everything and nothing. Over time, the friendship blossomed into something more, It wasn't the overwhelming passion of youth. We were too old for that. It was something calmer, wiser, more genuine. It was finally true love. Robert knew my whole story. I told him everything on a rainy afternoon, sitting in his cozy apartment, full of books. He listened without judging, holding my hands when the tears came. "What an incredible journey you've traveled, Teresa," he said when I finished. "What extraordinary strength to start over." We didn't officially marry. Both of us had too many scars to risk that institution again. But we shared almost 15 years of genuine companionship, of mutual respect, of serene love until his death in 2010. I learned of Nestor's death in 2005 through Michael. A massive stroke. He died alone in our old house, where he continued to live until the end. I didn't attend the funeral, but I sent flowers, not for him, but for the father who, in some distorted way, he had been to my children. After his death, Michael found the famous brown coat still hanging on the same hanger in the wardrobe. The envelope with the letters was no longer there. Nestor had probably destroyed it after our confrontation, but the coat itself remained as a silent symbol of that entire story. "What should I do with it?" Michael asked me over the phone. "Burn it," I replied without hesitation. "Burn it and scatter the ashes to the wind." Today, at 85, I look back and see a life marked by great pain, but also by great overcoming. I see a woman who was a victim, yes, but who refused to remain in that role. A woman who found the strength to start over when many would have given up. Nestor's old coat guarded a terrible secret that changed the course of my life. But in discovering it, as painful as it was, I also found a fundamental truth. It's never too late to start over, to seek the truth, to choose freedom. And if today I share this story with you, it's because I believe it can help other people who live in relationships built on lies, who feel that something is wrong but can't identify what, who are afraid to confront the truth. The truth can be painful, yes, it can turn our life upside down, but living in a lie, that is a prison whose bars we don't always perceive. And freedom, even if late, even if conquered through pain, is worth every tear shed along the way. My dears, if this story touched your heart in any way, please leave your like, subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and share in the comments where you're watching from. Each message from you is an embrace I receive. Each subscription gives me strength to continue sharing the lessons life has taught me. Thank you so much for listening to me today.